Howdy, Immortalium here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Nerima Daikon Brothers. Now, the first thing you might notice about this show is that it's directed by someone called Shinichi Watanabe. And many of you might be out there thinking to yourself, Shinichi Watanabe? Isn't that the guy who directed Cowboy Bebop? Well, you'd be wrong, because the guy who directed Cowboy Bebop is called Shinichiro Watanabe. Yes, that is a common mistake. In fact, Shinichi Watanabe is the guy who directed Excel Saga, which admittedly I have not seen. In fact, I believe this is my first Shinichi Watanabe show. And considering I was able to get it relatively cheap from Anime Limited, I decided why not? I may as well give this show a try. I'd heard semi-positive things about it. So of course the question is Nerima Daikon Brothers any good? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So let's get started. So what is the story of Nerima Daikon Brothers? Nerima Daikon Brothers follows three characters called Hideki, Ichiro, and Mako. And they own a plot of land. I guess it's more specific to say that Hideki owns a plot of land in the Nerima ward in Tokyo. And in this field they grow daikon in order to keep themselves afloat. But their goal is to one day build a dome, a musical dome, over the field and to play concerts there and to become super popular and super famous. But in order to do that, they need money, and so they end up in all sorts of goofy situations in order to try to make some money and to protect themselves. And to be honest, that's how most episodes go. In fact, this show, perhaps more strongly than most other shows that I can think of, follows a very strict formula. So basically each episode we hear about the plight of Hideki, Ichiro, and Mako, how they want to make money, how they want to be able to develop this dome and to be able to become super famous and popular. Eventually they encounter a villain. This villain may have a lot of money that they desire. This villain might be after them for whatever reason, whether it's to do with attraction or desiring the land, etc, etc. And typically they end up in trouble. And eventually they go to this older man who we never really get a good look at. He's always behind a desk. And he gives them some kind of weird item. An item that you're thinking to yourself, how the hell does that help them in this situation? And eventually they find some way to use it. They defeat the villain. If they make any money, they'll lose that money because obviously status quo rules. And then the next episode is basically rinse and repeat. Now, they do make some attempts to vary up the show. They introduce a new character a couple of episodes in order to be able to give the show a little bit of a freshness. There's also some quote-unquote character development on the relationship between these three characters, but for the most part the show is incredibly repetitive, unbelievably so, at least until the last couple of episodes where we do actually see some changes occur to the formula. But even then, that doesn't stop the show from being incredibly repetitive. Now, it's important, I guess, to talk about the style of the show, because admittedly the style of the show is kind of unusual. This is a musical comedy. And when it comes to the comedy of this show, I can't help but compare this series not to other anime, which is probably what you would expect an anime to be compared to. Instead, I find myself oddly enough comparing it to The Simpsons or South Park, in the sense that a lot of the episodes tackle some kind of theme, usually something that we would consider to be politically incorrect. And they have to deal with that situation. Usually that's who the villain is. And the problem that I have with these topics is the fact that there's absolutely no substance to them. In contrast to The Simpsons or South Park, where maybe they'll be politically incorrect every so often. In fact, in South Park's case, it's politically incorrect all the time. But it always has an important point to make. In contrast to Nerima Daikon Brothers, the villains are cliché. They are stereotypes of whatever topic they are tackling, and there is absolutely no substance here. And eventually I just found myself losing interest in this series. When it comes to the comedy itself, there are some moments that can be genuinely funny, but in general I think it's a pale imitation of a lot of Western adult animation. And in general I just think that this series doesn't have much of an identity. It doesn't stand out. It doesn't really fulfill the role that it wanted to fill. And so overall it's alright at best. At times it's actually pretty bad. With regards to the animation, now the animation here is quite interesting because it's very much a case of two halves. I will confess that I actually do like the art design of this series. It's very colorful. I like the character designs. They're relatively simple compared to many other anime series, but there is a very cartoony charm to the aesthetic of this series. And so from the artistic perspective, I actually do quite like this series. The problem comes when we get to the animation itself. Now, this is very clearly, to me at least, a cheap show. It was very clear that this show was on a budget and that they needed to take a lot of shortcuts when it came to the animation. And they do a lot of very nice techniques in order to drive up the energy of the series while simultaneously attempting to animate as little as possible. But even so, there's a lot of stiff movement here, a lot of very still frames. Now, there are moments where there is a lot of energy, and it's clear that they've been putting the budget towards that. But in general, this is a very mediocre show when it comes to the actual quality of the animation itself. But the art style, I do have to give it kudos for. I do like the actual look of this show. With regards to the music, now, I mentioned before that this is a musical comedy, and quite often you will actually hear the characters singing. So whether it be the villain singing about whatever plot that they have, or whether it be the characters themselves singing about their plan to overcome the villain, etc., etc. There is a lot of singing in this show. But a very interesting choice to make was to have the same songs constantly and to have the characters change the lyrics. So like they're singing about whatever situation they're in, but it's the same song that we heard in the previous episode and in the previous episode and in the previous episode. And it becomes very repetitive from that perspective. Now, admittedly, I guess this does drill in the music into your head. And in fact, in my head, I can actually very clearly remember a lot of the music in this series. But whether that's because the music is genuinely good or because the music was being repeated over and over again, I'm leaning more towards the repeating over and over again. The music isn't bad. Some of the songs are quite catchy. But again, they're nothing exceptional. And the choice to have them repeat over and over again is certainly an odd one. Now, this series is available in both Japanese with English subtitles and English. And after doing some research online on, the general quality of the English dub, I decided to watch this series in Japanese, and there was a few reasons why. For one, I heard that apparently the characters sound a little more brutal to each other in the English dub than they do in the Japanese. There was also a lot of changing of gags, which I guess has to be done. After all, comedy is one of the most difficult aspects to translate, particularly when a lot of your comedy is coming through puns. And in general, the voice cast does an okay job. There is absolutely no subtlety here in their performances. It is constantly over the top, but admittedly this is a very over the top show, and from that perspective, that is fine. They do an okay job with what they're given here. But their performances merely work with the show. They do not enhance the show. So overall, they do an alright job, but I certainly wouldn't think of this as a showcase for them. Now, with regards to the way it was released, now the copy that I have here was released by Anime Limited, and oddly enough, this show is only available on DVD from Anime Limited, which is quite unusual considering how prevalent Blu-ray is in their catalog. But I do believe this was an early release from them, and maybe it was a case that there is no HD remaster available, I don't know. But unfortunately the DVD is the only version available. Nonetheless, this is a surprisingly full package. There's 12 episodes, the picture quality is decent, particularly given the fact that it's DVD. But what's most interesting here is actually the extras. Now, in contrast to so many other releases, this actually has some Japanese commentaries, and when I say some, I mean every single episode actually has a commentary. Now, they do it in a bit of a weird format, in that a commentary runs throughout 4 episodes. So there's a commentary running from episode 1 to episode 4, there's a commentary running from episode 5 to episode 8, and then there's a commentary running from episode 9 to episode 12. And all of them include Shinichi Watanabe, and then later on they include some of the other voice cast members from the Japanese. And that is a very nice extra to include, and in that sense I have to give kudos to Anime Limited for getting it. Now, I do suspect that the reason that there's Japanese commentaries available at all is because this show was originally released by ADV, and I do believe that ADV was quite enthusiastic about releasing Japanese language commentaries on their releases. So I do believe that Anime Limited very simply just got the rights to them. Still, I do have to commend them for getting that. There's also a sing-along, interestingly, which I didn't bother with. And there are some promos and, you know, the textless opening and endings. So considering it's a DVD, it's actually not a bad package. I do have to give kudos to Anime Limited for this release in terms of the extras. Just a shame that there isn't a Blu-ray release. So overall, what are my thoughts on Nerima Daikon Brothers? It is a decidedly mediocre show that doesn't really ever find its identity, particularly compared to what I believe it's trying to emulate, which is a lot of these Western adult animated shows, tackling very difficult topics in a comedic fashion, but adding some kind of substance. This show does not have any substance. And if you're just looking for a goofy show that goes after some politically incorrect topics, but purely goes for the comedy of the situation, then maybe you will like this, particularly if you like the music from it. But what I will always remember this show for is not the story, is not the characters, is not the music, but for teaching me that the Dog of Flanders is actually very popular in Japan. In one of these episodes, one of the plans involves a performance of the Dog of Flanders, and I was genuinely very curious about this. And after doing some research, I found out that the Dog of Flanders, which is an English novel, is super popular in Japan and actually a fair few Asian countries. And doing all that research was quite fascinating for me. I actually ended up doing a blog post about that. But that's the most substantial thing that came to me from this show. Which is saying something. So overall, you could definitely do worse than this show, but I think you could definitely do better. It is a decidedly mediocre show, which never finds its own identity. So that was my review of Nerima Daikon Brothers. Did you watch the show? If you did watch the show, did you like the show? Did you dislike the show? What were some of your favorite things from this show? Some of your least favorite things? How do you think they tackled the topics presented in this show? And if you have any additional information you would like to add, please leave it in the comments below. And if you want to support the channel, feel free to use my Amazon affiliate links. They are in the description below, both for the UK and for America. By buying anime and manga through those affiliate links, not only are you supporting me, not only are you supporting the channel, but you're also supporting the anime or manga industries when you do that. So I would greatly appreciate it if you would purchase your anime and manga through my affiliate links. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.